Many of us have come to think of art, music, and writing as optional, things we get to if there's time. But what if brain science tells us the opposite? What if the arts are essential to our well being? That's what we're talking about today. If you're a doctor, healthcare leader, or patient, you belong here. I'm Kim Downey, and this is Stand Up for Doctors Conversations at the Intersection of Connection, Courage, and the Future of Healthcare. And by way of brief introduction, Dr. Kristin O'Dell is an experienced hospitalist, lifestyle medicine advocate, and physician coach. And Dr. Carolyn Roy-Bornstein is a pediatrician turned author, speaker, and narrative medicine facilitator. And I would like you both to tell our audience what you'd most like us to know about you as we begin our conversation today. Kristen, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Kim and Carolyn. One fun fact about me is as a board member of our county medical society, I have the joy of starting a Walk with the Doc local chapter. That's been born out of the lifestyle medicine movement, and it really combines walking, movement, and nature along with connection. There's also a health topic there. And so that has been a very fun endeavor. Additionally, my physician wife, has gotten into culinary medicine, and she describes cooking and the kitchen as her playground for creative space. And so get to be the beneficiary of that
Yeah, wow, I
playground.
love that. That's fantastic. I'll have to tell my husband. And I've had Dr. Shurishek Stava on a couple times. He's a physical therapist. He's also been certified in lifestyle medicine and does a walk with the doc where he is in Indiana. And I saw my own medical oncologist at Yale yesterday, and I saw something on the screen before he came in. So I think Yale is picking that up as well. And I think that's a terrific initiative. So thank you for sharing that. And Carolyn, what would you like us to know about you?
Let's see. I am the writer in residence at a large urban family medicine residency program where I teach narrative medicine. So I've retired from clinical care, but I still care for the caregivers, I like to think of it as. And I have written my fourth book. It came out in April with Johns Hopkins University Press. It's called A Prescription for Burnout, Restorative Writing for Healthcare Professionals.
Well, thank you for all the work that you've done and congratulations.
Thank you.
That's terrific. So I've recently read, as you both know, Your Brain on Art, How the Arts Transform Us, and it was recommended to me by Dr. A.J. Farrow, and I loved it. And the book shares fascinating research on how art, music, movement, writing, and nature can transform our brains and improve our well being. And I was especially intrigued to learn that some doctors are even prescribing museum visits to their patients. So while reading, I kept thinking about our upcoming physician retreat, and we've been spending just as much time designing the experiences between the topic discussions as we have in planning the conversations themselves. And alongside meaningful discussions, doctors will have the opportunity to explore abstract art, improv, writing, a drum circle, meditation, and even line dancing. And at first glance, these activities might seem unrelated to medicine, but they aren't. And the two of you are going to be guests at our physician retreat. You'll both be there. And Carolyn will actually sum up in some cornerstone thoughts some of the things actually that we're talking about today. So I would like to hear from you, Carolyn. What's been your experience with the arts in medicine?
So I am familiar with the book that you mentioned, Your Brain on Art. I read it cover to cover, and I actually quote it in my book. In the chapter on flourishing, I quote, I don't know if it was Ivy or Susan who came up with it, but they talk about we are a species of makers. Self-expression is crucial to who we are, and we can't flourish if we're not creating. And I talk about that a little bit in that chapter, both in creativity and in flourishing. And I also talk about, I don't know if you're familiar, either of you, with Charles Limb, but Limb, he is a surgeon and a neuroscience researcher, and a jazz musician. And he was very curious about what goes on in the minds of jazz musicians when they're improvising a piece of music. And so he compared in a functional MRI setting musicians who were just reading music and playing versus musicians who were improvising. And he describes it as your brain being the best version of itself. It's at its highest functioning when we're improvising, when we're creating. And I thought about us in our very first activity we're doing at the retreat, and I'm sure doing improv, comedy, or theater is a great icebreaker, and we'll get to know each other, and it'll be fun. But it's really activating really important areas of our brain, areas that usually maybe not inhibit, but monitor, but self-monitoring, all this self-monitoring we do. We don't allow ourselves to be creative, to make those connections. And so I'm really looking forward to that sort of improvisation aspect.
Yes, I am as well. And the reason I got some of these ideas is as I went through, as you both may know, I had cancer 3 times during the pandemic, and I used the services of Ann's Place, our local cancer support center. And I just struggled with some things. I had a complication from my first surgery and things like that. And to be able to go there, and I participated in everything. Actually, that behind me is a little collage a project. And so I did that and painting, and I participated in midweek mindfulness and meditation, grief yoga. I even took a few piano lessons, and I felt like it all helped, or just being in community with other people, as you're just sitting and doing the art projects. And I do know that I'm a physical therapist, right, by training, and I know that it does use a different part of your brain, and it just feels different, and it just felt healing. And I just thought those would be great to incorporate. So I love that I more recently found the book, because doctors are like, show me the science. So we can. I'm going to bring the book. So, Kristin, do you have like a powerful story that you'd like to share?
What comes to mind is a couple of things. One, the clinical aspect of this, and how as clinicians we are using our creativity all of the time in our communication, in our clinical decision making, differential diagnosis, in the setting of some of that uncertainty without all that information. And also how infrequently we create space to notice that we're using that, with all the messages, the alarms, the interruptions. And so it's this curious space to me about bringing back that curiosity, creating a little bit of space to even begin to notice that we are utilizing creative energy, the arts, and that it also brings us back to our presence. And so that when we are present, opens the door for so many things: curiosity, connection, possibility, and even transforming what's possible. And that was really a part of my burnout journey, specifically in that nature, and leading me into coaching about transforming what's possible and holding that curious space. The other side, in addition to the clinical uses, during the pandemic, one of our hospital elder life programs that I had a chance to volunteer with specifically called out music and drawing with our patients, and just really matching what was meaningful to them to calm that to, as a stress reduction tool, a nervous system regulation. And then on the flip side, caring for an aging parent who is currently on hospice, really seeing the power of music, some movement, and really nature. And so my mom is having the opportunity to be at her lake cabin, looks outside at any window of the lake and the nature and the trees. And I have just seen how that has helped her calm and thrive.
Yeah, that's a beautiful share, and I wish you all the best. I know that's a very hard time, but that's beautifully said. Carolyn, anything you'd wish to respond to what Kristin said, and if you'd like to share a story of your own?
Yeah, I guess I'd just like to talk about the work I do in narrative medicine. And because what we're talking about, what Kristin was talking about, reminds me a lot of the way Rita Sharon puts it, who is the person who coined the term and who directs the program of narrative medicine at Columbia. And she talks about this taking in and putting out, and she likens it to a heartbeat. And in diastole is when we as clinicians are sitting with our patients, actively listening, absorbing, metabolizing their story, being present, as Kristin was saying. So that in systole, as she calls it, that's when we do our active thinking and diagnosing and ordering and putting it all together. And Kim, you and I talked about the artist way as well and the artist date. And Julia Cameron, who wrote that book, talks about needing to take a break, the quiet that you mentioned, Kristin, the presence that you need to refill that well of creativity. Like as writers or artists of any kind, or as doctors, we're constantly putting out, we're constantly busy, active, going from one patient to another, but taking that time to refill that well of creativity so that we have something left, not just for the patients, but for ourselves. And I see it, we do three movements of in narrative medicine. The first is where we do a close reading of a piece of literature, generally a short poem, and then we write reflectively in the shadow of that art, trying to get the residents to, not get them to, they do it quite readily, connect the story they've listened to and read and discussed with their own clinical experience or their own personal experience. And, I can't tell you the number of times I've heard them say, and not just them, but I've given these reflective writing workshops for nurses and social workers and others, this moment of, wow, I never knew I felt that way, or wow, I didn't realize that I was carrying all that, whatever, that guilt, that anger, whatever. And I think, Joan Didion says, I write to know entirely what I'm thinking. And I think we know what we're thinking, even if we don't write. But I think that we don't appreciate necessarily the toll that it has taken sometimes, what we've been bearing witness to, patient suffering. And so that's a joy to experience, that wow moment when people really take the time to stop and listen to their own brains, quiet their own chatter and listen to their own hearts and minds and say, wow, I really, I didn't know I felt that way. And sort of this self-discovery that happens.
Mhm. Yeah, I can appreciate that. And I never considered myself a writer, but I did also participate in writing groups at Ann's Place. And now I've collaborated on
You
two
wrote a
books and
book.
dozens of Kevin MD articles and all that. So it's never say never, right? Chris and I had seen you nodding your head. Did that bring something to mind for you?
Oh yes, it's so much about the tools. And Carolyn was talking about, that the tools for processing our day to day, and sometimes in the clinical world, the challenging events, the opportunity for us to like uncouple the process. Often in medicine, we're outcome driven, and this offers an opportunity to look at that process without necessarily a predetermined outcome. The other piece I want to touch on that Carolyn talked about is when I was in my department chair role, especially through the pandemic, the topic of clinician well-being, just as we're looking at facing clinician deficits of all sorts, healthcare deficits, was really on my heart and mind. And it has been occurring to me how this creativity, these processes can restore our agency, offering us the opportunity to express ourselves, our journey, our choices, our individuality. And especially in a time when our agency and autonomy in medicine often feel threatened, this is a powerful opportunity.
Well, that's a beautiful segue to my next episode that I'm going to record in about 2 hours from this one. And Sunday morning of our retreat, we're going to have an open space style workshop, physician advocacy. How can we restore agency for ourselves, for our profession, and to consider these that you wouldn't maybe normally consider. So that's great. That's the perfect timing for that. And one thing I may have shared with you both in a message is so Kristen spoke a little to the opposite. Like, in a way, I felt like doctors aren't is creative at work or don't have the time and space as back in the day. Like, I became a physical therapist in the 80s, and say a wheelchair was broken or a little kid needed something. Like, you could even stop and have time to jerry rig something, or make something, or create a toy or something. And now we have none of that. And I was wondering if, like, physicians for the same thing, that there's no quiet moment to speak to think about the patient. Or also, like, when I was pregnant with my kids, I would meet with the gynecologist in his office, and there would be family pictures. Like, it would be whatever he wanted, or a vase from a trip. But now the doctor's rooms I go in are generic, and one doctor could be in room 3 now, and then their next patient could be in room 2, right? So there's nothing personal about it in general. So it felt to me like sometimes doctors aren't don't have the time and space to insert creativity as much at work. Now, you, Kristen, were sharing ways that they do actually do that, but I almost felt it was more important that it's important to spotlight that, to think about, well, if it is a little bit stifled or somewhat at work, that makes it even more important to do it outside work. So I'd be interested in both of your experiences with that.
Well, I think it's also important to, because our day is patient to patient, to colleague, to phone, to computer, back to patient, it is important to reclaim those small moments that we have, those moments of meaning and joy with patients. Um, there's a group, Sanjay Saint runs a group out in the University of Michigan, and he has been publishing on sacred moments, which that group defines as brief, meaningful connections with patients. And in one study, they looked at like 600 internists and asked them about sacred moments. Did they experience them, whether they did, how often they did? And over two-thirds did, which I thought was really heartening, that people recognize, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I had that experience. So I think bringing that awareness in whatever way, through the retreat, through reading these books about art, or what have you, to give ourselves permission to not just recognize those sacred moments, which I think reflective writing can do, make us more open to that possibility of creating those moments, or just recognizing those moments. Um, as we go through our day, just reclaiming those small moments we do have with our patients.
I love that, and I've experienced that with my own physicians, and I like it that you can actually think about curating them, and it makes the interactions more meaningful for the doctor and the patient. Because I've seen lots of doctors, and sometimes that's not there at all. And I would leave feeling a bit hollow, and I wonder if the doctor does too.
I bet
Uh,
you're right.
yeah, Kristen.
Yes, you know, it occurs to me as thinking back on the journey through medicine when we started so curious and savoring some of that novelty, those new interactions, those sacred moments, as Carolyn pointed out. And often over our careers, the day-to-day just becomes top of mind. How do I get through this day? How do I answer this? How do I complete the bulk of tasks that's asked of me in one day? And so that while there is that opportunity, sometimes we are not aware of it, and bringing in some intentionality into that awareness, and that they are there and could be there, and also creating that space. And so an opportunity for all of us, either within our day to day, on our drives, commutes, and even for leadership. As a former leader in that space, calling out those opportunities to savor some of those positives, positive interactions, or even create things like walking meetings, which we were doing, trying to get outside and pair for that win-win combination. But I love that idea of reclaiming some of those moments throughout our day that I feel like our training really does not highlight.
Hmm. Yeah, that's important to spotlight, and also the fact that you said that leadership, can have a role in fostering this at work. And I love that, and I love to spotlight caring leaders and leaders that are doing things right so we can replicate and amplify what they're doing. Carolyn, what do you enjoy other than narrative writing in the arts?
Let's see. I mean, like anybody, I like going to museums and concerts and so forth. Kristen mentioned nature, and up here in Maine, that's a big part of our lives up here. And I have three grandchildren now, so it's really fun to see them enjoying some of the same things that I like in terms of ice skating and snowshoeing and kayaking and stand-up paddleboarding and just being out in nature and noticing so many things. Children are such little sponges and little noticers. They're like little microscope eyes. They teach me a lot, those kids.
Yes, I love that. And yes, we had mentioned the artist's way and the I'd say two main themes in that book. It talks about doing morning pages. But I'd say even if you can't do them in the morning, it was just a daily just getting things out, right? And how that almost like a brain dump and in a way that that can free you up. So the artist pages and then also as I think you mentioned the weekly artist date. And it
Mm.
doesn't have to be going, you don't have to go to a museum every week. Sometimes it could be going on a nature walk and just like sometimes I'll do that and look for what's blooming in every yard. It could be very simple things. So, Kristen, what do you like to do?
Well, as a blended family, we have teenagers and we have a 3-year-old. And so for the 3-year-old, we love to go outside and do little nature walks. What can we collect that we could maybe create nature art with? um, and two, here in Madison, the land of lakes. So we have several lakes near us. So being outside on the water, kayaking, boating, stand-up paddleboarding, um, taking in art as far as shows has just been a beautiful. And then certainly during the pandemic, one big transition was gardening and bringing that garden, however it may look in whatever space we're able to create outside and or inside. And that has been a fun activity, a family friendly activity as well.
That's beautiful. I love that. And Carolyn, is there anything else you'd like to share about your work?
Um, I would say one thing we're talking about books we've read, and there's one book that has influenced my work because I hear a lot, I'm not a writer. I can't write. I
Mhm.
don't have a creative bone in my body. I hear that a lot. And I read years ago a book by a orthopedic surgeon and his wife, who is a um, a doctor of psychology, and they wrote a book called The Creativity Cure. And they talk
Mhm.
about working with your hands in any number of ways. And they talk about creative capacity. And I thought that was such an interesting way to think about it, to get over that I'm not an artist, which is
Hmm.
so unhelpful. But just to think about what you've done in your day? Have you put together a great meal with what you have in your pantry? Have you curated a new outfit with things you have in your closet? Do you harmonize with the radio in the car? Have you repurposed something? Like we're all creative beings. We are a species of makers, going back to your brain on art. And so I find that to be a really helpful way to do the work I do and to, like Kristen said, create that space, that opening for people to believe in themselves, that they can do it, sort of cultivate that openness, being open to the possibility that maybe I can do this. Maybe I do that. Open yourself up to that wow moment, that unexpected realization about yourself or a patient or a colleague, some relationship. I find that a useful concept.
Yeah, that's great. And that's one reason that the art session, they're all only 30 minutes. So everyone will feel comfortable giving it a try. It's only 30 minutes, but that's why we're doing abstract art because we didn't want anybody to think, oh, I can't draw a horse. I'm not going to do that art thing. So anything goes in abstract art. Kristen, is there anything else you'd like us to know about your work?
I love the freedom that offers, Kim, that you were sharing. Yeah, in as a hospitalist and now primarily doing physician coaching, that power of creating that space and the questions, that curiosity has really been impactful, not only in my own journey, but in the clients and the clinicians, physicians, and APPs that I've coached, just to bring back that presence and that possibility. And I love holding that space because, so many of us started medicine with all kinds of awe and wonder about science and the human body and wanting to learn. And I love how Carolyn talked about that and how the arts can be an opportunity for us to continue to learn, to grow into a different form of capacity that maybe or capability than we initially thought or considered, and discovering ways to bring that into our day to day. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great. The power of the pause and creating white space is so important, and staying curious. And we're going to have time and space over that weekend. We have extended time after lunch and before dinner. So people can do whatever they want. They can go for a walk. They could chat with their colleagues. Just time to take that pause and be curious. So I love all of that. And is there anything else you'd like to share that brings you joy, Carolyn?
Let's see. What's bringing me joy recently is trampolining. My granddaughter has turned me on to the joys of trampolining, which hopefully is good for my bone density as well.
That's awesome. And how about you, Kristen?
Oh, I'm so curious. As a former gymnast, Carolyn, I am so yes, the beauty of the bouncing and that trampoline and the space. What's bringing me joy? Oh, there is so much. It's really looking at things through the eyes of not only my aging parent, but also, my 3-year-old, and that wonder, that curiosity, that newness is bringing all kinds of joy. As is trying something new. That has always brought me something joy, whatever it may be, whether it's a new creation that my spouse makes, a culinary creation, um, just putting myself out of that comfort zone. That has been bringing me joy.
Yes, those are both great. So you have a young one, and Carolyn has some grandkids. And yes, seeing things through the eyes of a child, that is always a joy maker for sure. And speaking to trying something new, I did a Kevin MD podcast with two physical therapists, and one of them mentioned that it was a surgeon he was discussing who was having chronic pain, and he went to therapy and took the pills and did all these things, but what really helped him was pottery and ballroom
Mhm.
dancing because he was using his muscles in a different way. So just the strict exercise wasn't successful, and so that's yet another reason. And it could be a benefit because if you're doing some of these things, you're actually moving your body in a different way than you are during the workday.
For sure.
So, yes, yes. Well, thank you so much for being my guest today. I was wondering if you have a take home action message for our audience.
I would say make room for the unexpected, to
Mhm.
cultivate that openness to new experiences. I'm pushing 70, and it always thrills me when I do something I've never done before. When I recently went to a shooting range, and it's not anything I ever thought I would do. But I have two grown sons, and I have two grown foster daughters who that and three grandchildren from my two foster daughters. And if I had not been open to the unexpected, if I had not made room for that unexpected, I would not have the life I have today. And you can do that just in small ways every day by just cultivating openness.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Kristen, do you have a take-home action message
Oh,
for our audience?
yes, thank you, Carolyn. I would say your presence is your power. And so, where will you cultivate your presence, your curiosity, your beginner mindset today?
That's great. Perfect way to end this wonderful conversation, which is really a pause in the conversation because we'll be continuing this in person. And thank you for being part of our Stand Up for Doctors Global Neighborhood, a place where physicians and those who care about them can connect, empower, recharge, and celebrate. You'll find more stories like this in our White Coats book series. And if you're a doctor, would love to welcome you at our inaugural physician retreat this October, where, as I mentioned, these conversations will continue in person. Would be honored to have you join us. And if you'd like to help sustain this podcast, please consider sponsoring an episode or connecting us with a Mission Line sponsor. Links are in the show notes, including how to reach out to our guests. And in closing, to move the needle in healthcare, we all need to raise our voices and we all need to care about each other. We already know that doctors need to care about patients. Patients need to care about doctors too. So stand up, doctors, and let's stand up for doctors.